It was supposed to be a quiet Saturday morning, until my phone lit up with a flood of text messages all screaming the same thing in different ways. Bulls are loose in the neighborhood. I blinked and reread them, thinking someone had to be pulling a prank. Then came the video. My neighbor Gary had filmed it from his front porch, shaking with laughter, while a herd of my full-grown Brahma bulls galloped across the HOA's annual safety parade. One bull nosed over a bouncy castle, another delicately stepped on a lawn gnome, and the third stood calmly chewing cud, as Karen shrieked from the top of a magnolia tree. Dressed in a sash that read "Parade Organizer," she clung to a branch, while yelling at my bulls to leave HOA property, as if they understood English or respected fake authority. I dropped my coffee mug, still in my pajamas, and ran out the door, because I knew exactly what happened. Karen had cut my fence. The madness hadn't started that morning. It began 2 days earlier when Karen stormed onto my property uninvited for the third time, that week waving a clipboard like it was a sheriff's badge. She always approached like she was doing me a favor. Even when she was complaining, she had that signature smug look, over-bleached hair puffed into a stiff helmet, oversized sunglasses, and a voice that always sounded 1 decibel too loud, like she was talking to a room full of deaf people. She stood just inside the boundary of my ranch, eyeing the fence with theatrical disgust, as if it offended her soul. "This fence is an eyesore," she announced loud enough for the cows to hear. "It makes the whole community look like a prison yard." I glanced at the fence, an 8-foot-high steel barrier reinforced with electric wiring and 2 additional wooden rails. It had held back my bulls for years and passed every county inspection, but Karen didn't care about functionality or safety. She cared about aesthetics, HOA aesthetics, which seemed to mean artificial turf beige paint and whatever was trending on suburban Pinterest boards. I calmly reminded her that my ranch wasn't under HOA jurisdiction, and the fence was there to protect everyone, including her and her plastic flamingo collection from the 2,000-pound animals who lived behind it. She didn't like that answer. "Well, I spoke with the board, and we agree that something more natural would blend better with the community, maybe some split rail wood with flower beds, charming rustic." "I don't think you understand how physics or bulls work," I told her with a smile. "They'd walk through that like it was tissue paper." Karen sniffed, rolled her eyes, and strutted away like she had made a note to deal with me later. Turns out she didn't wait long. The next morning I went out to check the pasture and noticed something strange. One of the bull's big techs was chewing on a piece of nylon rope. That was my first clue. I followed the rope and found a gaping hole in the northeast fence line. The heavy steel mesh had been sliced clean and replaced with 3 strands of thin decorative rope tied around garden stakes. I blinked at it, trying to process the stupidity. It was like replacing a bank vault door with a paper screen. A note was taped to one of the stakes in Karen's unmistakable curly handwriting. "Fixed it for you, enjoy the new view, smiley face." I stared at the note, then stared at the tracks of my bulls heading straight for the HOA's back trail. They had no idea what they were walking into, and the HOA had no idea what was coming. It didn't take long to catch up to the mess as I sped toward the community in my truck with my ranch dog Boone barking beside me. I passed 2 HOA members running in the opposite direction, one without shoes and the other clutching a foldable lawn chair like a weapon. I rounded the corner and slammed on the brakes. My herd had made themselves at home. One bull, Margarita, had wandered into someone's front yard and was licking a garden gnome. Another was blocking traffic by sitting contentedly in the middle of the cul-de-sac chewing on someone's parade banner. The biggest bull, Beefcake, was inspecting a golf cart which he then flipped over with one nudge just to see what would happen. Kids were cheering, adults were screaming, and someone was filming the whole thing on a drone hovering above. And there she was, Karen, halfway up a tree, screaming at everyone to stay calm and that she had it all under control despite clearly being stuck. One of her heels dangled from a branch. Her phone was somehow still in her hand, and she appeared to be trying to dial 911 between yells. "You need to remove these unlicensed animals," she screeched at me as I approached. "Unlicensed? They're not Uber drivers, Karen," I said, pulling out a cattle prod, "and lasso their livestock that you set free with your unauthorized landscaping." I radioed for backup from my ranch hands and started rounding up the bulls, who were mostly cooperative, except for Margarita, who had found a sprinkler to play with. Karen kept screaming about lawsuits, HOA codes, and how this was animal terrorism. I had to stifle a laugh. when one of the bulls walked up to her tree and started sniffing around the base. "Don't you dare let that beast near me," she cried, clutching the trunk. Boone, my dog, barked helpfully, as if to say, "Yeah, lady, that's what happens when you mess with ranch security." It took about an hour to wrangle them all back into the trailer. I borrowed a neighbor's utility gate and sealed the fence temporarily, while calling a welder for emergency repairs. All the while people from the neighborhood gathered to gawk, film, and ask questions. Many of them had no idea there was even a ranch behind their community, much less that it housed bulls, who were now local celebrities thanks to drone footage titled "Bull Break" at HOA Parade going viral in under 3 hours. By late afternoon the bulls were safe, the fence was patched, and Karen was finally coaxed down from her perch by the fire department, who made her sign a waiver in case she tried to sue them later. But the damage had been done, and as I stood watching the HOA residents start to turn on her, asking who gave her permission to cut the fence, and what authority she thought she had, I realized this was just the beginning. Because if Karen thought a few strands of rope could replace a steel barrier, she had no idea what I was going to do next. I had bulls, but I also had a lawyer, a cousin in the sheriff's office, and an HOA board that was about to find out exactly what happens when you mess with a rancher's boundaries. By the time the sun crept over the hills the next morning, the video of my bulls gate crashing the HOA parade had already racked up nearly 4 million views. It was featured on local news, meme pages, and even a late-night show where the host joked that the bulls had done more to improve HOA policy in 2 minutes than any legislation had in 10 years. The clip showed everything: Karen yelling at my bulls like they were wayward teenagers, Beefcake flipping the golf cart with casual elegance, and Boone barking commands like a ranch sergeant. Meanwhile, I was already back on the pasture, repairing the real damage and quietly planning my next move. I didn't need revenge for ego. I needed accountability. Karen had cut my fence, a literal line of safety separating two worlds. And it wasn't just a property issue. It was a matter of public safety. Any one of those bulls could have panicked in that unfamiliar environment, trampled a child, or charged someone with a noisy leaf blower. That didn't happen because my bulls are trained, but it could have, and that fact alone had my blood boiling. While I was welding the new section of the fence, Gary from next door pulled up in his golf cart, the same one Beefcake had so gracefully overturned. He stepped out gingerly, wincing as he examined a fresh dent in the front bumper. He gave a sheepish grin. "You know, I never thought I'd say this, but your bull has better parking instincts than Karen." I laughed, not because it was funny, but because sometimes laughter is the only thing that keeps you from yelling. Gary told me the HOA had called an emergency meeting to address the recent animal incident. He made air quotes around the phrase with his fingers and shook his head. "It's happening at the clubhouse at 1 p.m. You might want to show up before Karen starts handing out pitchforks and torches." I didn't need convincing. After finishing the fence and giving Boone a big bowl of cold water, I cleaned up and drove into the neighborhood with a folder full of documents: fence blueprints, livestock permits, boundary maps, and a printed copy of Karen's handwritten note. If she thought she was going to turn this around on me, she was about to be sorely mistaken. The clubhouse was buzzing with tension when I arrived. Half the room looked angry, the other half looked embarrassed, and Karen stood at the front with her arms folded like she was about to brief the press. She was wearing another sash. This one said Interim Community Emergency Liaison. I didn't know what that meant, and I was pretty sure she didn't either. Before I could say anything, she raised her voice and launched into a speech so dripping in fake concern that I could practically hear the syrup sloshing in her throat. "We are gathered here today not to assign blame, but to learn from a deeply traumatic event in our neighborhood's history. An event involving wild livestock, emotional stress, and, most importantly, the total lack of coordination from nearby landowners." Wild livestock? I nearly choked. Those bulls are calmer than most HOA meetings. But she wasn't done. Due to negligence, these massive creatures invaded our peaceful community during a family parade. Children cried. Seniors scattered. And I, your elected safety liaison, was nearly injured in the line of duty. Line of duty? You climbed a tree to scream at a cow, I muttered loud enough for Gary to snort laugh beside me. Karen turned on me like a bloodhound catching a scent. And here he is, the man whose animals breached our borders. I think we all deserve to hear an apology. Apology? I stepped forward and opened my folder. Actually, I brought documents. Would you like to see the real border? Along with the fence inspection report from last month, and, oh yes, your note. The one where you admitted to cutting my fence and replacing it with rope. That was really thoughtful. I held it up for everyone to see. Gasps rippled through the room. Karen's face turned so red it looked like she was auditioning for a tomato festival. She sputtered, then snatched at the paper like it was going to save her. But I wasn't done. Cutting a livestock fence in this county is a criminal offense. I've already filed a report with the sheriff's office. Tampering with livestock barriers isn't just stupid, it's dangerous. If someone had gotten hurt or worse, your little landscaping stunt would have turned into a lawsuit bigger than your HOA budget. Karen started to shout, but Gary stood up and raised his voice. He's right. My cart got flipped. I'm not mad at the bull. I'm mad at whoever gave them a red carpet into our community. And if I hadn't swerved, I might have ended up under that thing instead of beside it. More neighbors started murmuring. One woman whispered that her toddler had tried to pet one of the bulls. Another said she'd almost backed into Margarita with her Prius. And then came the biggest twist of all. The HOA vice president, a soft-spoken man named Howard who rarely said anything unless absolutely necessary, stood up and cleared his throat. I watched the drone footage. And I read Karen's note. He turned to face her. Did you really think it was appropriate to alter someone else's property without permission just because it didn't fit your aesthetic preferences? Karen fumbled for words but came up dry. Howard turned back to the group. I motion that we formally remove Karen from any emergency or landscaping roles within the HOA until further review. All in favor? Hands shot up across the room like prairie dogs. Karen's jaw dropped. She spun to look at me, venom in her eyes. This isn't over. You're right, I said. It's just getting started. I walked out of that meeting not with a victory lap, but with a checklist. Karen might have been knocked down a peg, but she wasn't done causing trouble. I knew her type. She didn't quit. She doubled down. Which is why I spent the next 2 hours at the sheriff's office filing formal reports, delivering the footage, and letting the county know there had been a deliberate breach of safety protocol on my land. Back home, I reinforced the new fence with additional braces and even installed a motion sensor camera facing the HOA line. Boone supervised proudly, tail wagging like he was guarding a military base. I told him, good boy. This isn't over. But next time, we're going to be ready. As the sun dipped behind the hills, I poured myself a strong coffee and sat on the porch watching my bulls graze peacefully as if nothing had happened. But deep down I knew the calm was temporary. Karen didn't just lose face today. She lost power. And people like her always try to take it back. But next time she tried to cross the line, she'd find out that boundaries on a ranch aren't just fences. They're warnings. And Karen had just tripped the first one. 3 days after the HOA meeting, I received a manila envelope hand-delivered by someone in a suit too tight to be comfortable in the summer heat. The man didn't say a word, just nodded, dropped the envelope, and walked away as if the paper inside was too dangerous to touch for long. I knew immediately it wasn't a friendly letter. Karen had officially filed a lawsuit against me. And not just any lawsuit. Inside was a multi-page complaint in which she accused me of reckless endangerment, livestock negligence, emotional trauma, loss of personal property, and, my personal favorite, willful bovine aggression. I read the whole thing twice, not sure whether to be furious or impressed at the sheer audacity. She had attached screenshots from the drone video and added captions like, "The animal makes direct eye contact before charging," and "Witness cowers under HOA-issued float banner." It would have been laughable if it wasn't real. She was dragging me into court for a situation she created by cutting through my livestock barrier. And now she was claiming to be the victim. It was delusional, but also dangerous, because while the HOA had turned on her temporarily, nothing stirred them into action faster than a lawsuit that could cost them financially. I had no choice but to lawyer up. Luckily, I had the right guy for the job. My longtime friend Ethan was not just an attorney, he was a specialist in agricultural law and property rights. He once successfully defended a farmer who accidentally built a chicken coop on city land. If anyone could turn Karen's nonsense into a flaming pile of legal embarrassment, it was him. Ethan came over that same evening, reviewed the packet, and burst out laughing before he even got to the second page. She's seriously calling it intentional bovine deployment? Like you aim them like missiles? That's what it says. Apparently, Beefcake is a tactical unit now. He flipped another page and whistled low. She wants compensation for emotional distress and the loss of authority in her HOA role. I didn't even know that was a thing you could sue for. It isn't, I said. But she'll try anything. We got to work assembling our defense. I handed over security footage of the fence before and after it was cut. I gave him the handwritten note she left, the one admitting she'd replaced the fence with rope. I also sent the drone footage and a few statements from HOA members who were already siding with me. We even tracked down the welder who fixed the breach and got his sworn statement confirming that the fence had been deliberately damaged. Ethan grinned as he reviewed the pile of evidence. She's gonna wish she just stayed in the tree. But the thing about Karen was she didn't just double down, she tripled down. Within 2 days of filing the lawsuit, she started a neighborhood petition claiming my ranch was a safety hazard. She printed flyers that said things like, "Do you want your child to be the next victim of a rogue cow?" and left them on windshields. She had a website up by the end of the week, featuring manipulated images of bulls foaming at the mouth and testimonials from anonymous sources saying they were afraid to leave their homes. It would have been a complete joke if it hadn't started to gain traction. A few of the more easily influenced HOA members began whispering again, unsure who to believe. That's when I knew I had to push back publicly. I didn't want to stir the pot, but I also wasn't going to let lies grow root. So, I organized a town hall-style meeting at my ranch. I invited everyone from the neighborhood, offered free lemonade, and had Boone there wagging his tail to set a peaceful tone. I even introduced the bulls one by one from behind a reinforced pen, so people could see how calm and gentle they really were. Big Tex laid down and napped through most of the event. Margarita licked a child's hat. Beefcake stared into the distance like a philosopher considering the meaning of grass. And one by one, people began to realize the truth. These animals weren't threats, they were better neighbors than Karen. I also took the opportunity to explain how livestock containment worked, why cutting a fence could lead to tragedy, and how I had never once had an incident until the HOA's landscaping queen decided she knew better than basic ranch law. When I mentioned the lawsuit, most people rolled their eyes. A few actually apologized for not speaking up sooner. One elderly couple offered to write a character reference for me. It didn't undo the damage, but it did shift the momentum. And Karen, who had tried to intimidate me into submission, now found herself losing control of the narrative. But it wasn't over yet. A week later, I received the court summons. The hearing date had been set. Ethan and I prepared meticulously. We had diagrams, statements, permits, and Karen's note enlarged to poster size. When the day finally arrived, the courtroom was packed. Karen showed up dressed like she was headed to a business award gala, complete with a designer handbag and oversized pearl earrings. She had brought her own lawyer, a man who looked like he'd been lured in with the promise of free wine and a photo op. The judge, a no-nonsense woman with silver hair and a gavel that could crack granite, called the session to order. Karen's lawyer opened with a dramatic retelling of the parade incident, painting Karen as a brave leader who had sacrificed her safety to protect her community from an oncoming livestock assault. He claimed I had failed in my duty to contain the bulls, that the fence was insufficient, and that Karen had merely acted in desperation to beautify and reinforce the property line. It was such an upside-down version of events I almost laughed. Then it was our turn. Ethan stood, straightened his tie, and calmly demolished their argument piece by piece. He presented the note. He submitted the drone footage. He played audio from the HOA meeting where Karen admitted to cutting the fence. He showed the welding report, the permit copies, and a breakdown of livestock law in our county. The judge asked a few pointed questions, and by the time Ethan was done, even Karen's lawyer looked like he regretted taking the case. Then came the best moment of the trial. Ethan asked if we could bring in a demonstration bull to highlight the training and temperament of the animals in question. The judge agreed on the condition that the animal remained secured. So, in walked Beefcake, calmly led by one of my ranch hands, wearing a halter and stopping only to sniff the floor. The entire room tensed, but Beefcake didn't so much as flick an ear. He stood beside the witness stand like he'd been called to testify. Karen's face turned pale. She shrieked and ducked behind her lawyer, shouting something about safety violations. The judge raised an eyebrow. "Ma'am, that bull has done less yelling than you since the hearing started." I couldn't help but smile. The moment spoke for itself. When the judge finally gave her ruling, she didn't mince words. The lawsuit was dismissed with prejudice. Karen's claims were baseless. Her actions in cutting the fence had endangered the community, and the court was forwarding the matter to the sheriff's department for investigation of potential criminal trespass and property damage. Karen's jaw dropped. Her lawyer quietly started packing his briefcase without making eye contact. I walked out of that courtroom feeling lighter than I had in weeks. Not because I had won, but because the truth had finally been made official. Karen had tried to twist the facts, weaponize fear. The courtroom win should have been the end of it. For most rational people, being publicly embarrassed, legally defeated, and put under investigation would be enough of a reality check to back off and reflect. But Karen wasn't most people. If anything, being exposed seemed to fuel her with some fresh delusion of persecution. The very next day, she filed an appeal notice. Not because she had new evidence or legal standing, but because, as she claimed in a local Facebook post, she refused to be silenced by farm bullies and their enablers. That was her actual wording. Farm bullies. The comments under her post were pure gold, though. One person asked if the bulls were also hackers now. Another just posted a photo of Beefcake with the caption, HOA President 2025. Karen, however, had lost control of her own narrative. The public was no longer on her side. Even the HOA board, now tired of being dragged into her chaos, had begun circulating a private vote to remove her entirely from any committee responsibilities. She responded by trying to double down on neighborhood authority. I got a warning letter taped to my mailbox a day after the post. It claimed I was in violation of community harmony standards because my cows had traumatized local pets with their scent. It was laughable. I didn't even have cows. I had bulls, and they were back in their secure pasture behind a fence stronger than ever, thanks to some recent upgrades. After the lawsuit, I decided to invest in peace of mind. I wasn't just rebuilding the fence, I was future-proofing it. I installed a reinforced triple barrier system along the boundary nearest the HOA, complete with solar-powered electric fencing, motion sensors, and 24/7 surveillance cameras. I even planted thorny shrubs in front of the fence to discourage accidental decorators from getting any funny ideas. My cousin Rick, who worked in county enforcement, gave it a once-over and declared it more secure than the jail's livestock enclosure down by the fairground. He wasn't joking. Boone, my ranch dog, had his own monitoring station now. He sat every evening under the porch light, ears perked up, waiting for any sign of HOA mischief. But the final cherry on top came in the form of the county's follow-up investigation. After the judge forwarded Karen's actions to law enforcement, an official report was opened. Karen was contacted and asked to submit a formal statement. Instead of cooperating, she sent them a 3-page manifesto blaming my bulls for psychic intimidation and suggesting I had used animal-assisted sabotage to ruin her life. The sheriff's deputy assigned to the case laughed so hard he had to take a break before filing the report. I was told they weren't pressing criminal charges yet, but she had received a formal citation for trespassing and destruction of property. It was enough to get her formally removed from her post as HOA emergency liaison, and the board, perhaps feeling the heat of community opinion, finally voted her off as landscaping chair as well. Gary called me that night, practically giggling. She tried to run the vote and ended up getting voted out mid-sentence. It was the fastest HOA meeting in recorded history. I didn't celebrate yet, though, because knowing Karen, she wouldn't just lick her wounds and disappear. She would try something petty, something sneaky, something that would put her back on the moral high ground in her mind. And she didn't disappoint. The next weekend, a delivery truck pulled up in front of her house and offloaded a towering statue of a Greek goddess holding a scale and a sword. Karen had apparently custom-ordered it and placed it right at the corner where her yard met the boundary of my fence. It was bolted into a concrete slab with a motion-activated speaker that blared inspirational quotes about justice whenever someone passed. I heard it clearly from my porch. Truth fears nothing but concealment. It would echo at midnight, while Boone growled low and looked at me like even he thought the HOA had finally lost it. I took a walk down to the property line just to inspect it. She was standing there watering fake hydrangeas in a neon visor, pretending not to notice me. I gave her a polite wave, which she returned with a tight-lipped smile that looked like it hurt. "Quite a bold lawn ornament," I said. "It's art," she replied. "Unlike your electric cattle fence, which is a daily reminder of intimidation tactics used on innocent communities." "You mean the fence you cut?" I already told the sheriff I was trying to help. If people would stop twisting my good intentions, we'd all be in a better place. That was Karen's trademark. Destroy something, claim it was an act of love, and then act confused when people got upset. I turned back toward the ranch and left her statue to keep preaching in the wind. But I had an idea brewing. Not out of spite, but out of poetic necessity. If she wanted statues and symbolism, then I'd speak the language too. The next week, I had a local metal artist construct a new sign to hang over the gate on my side of the fence. It was a rustic ironwork archway with cut-out silhouettes of bulls standing proudly, and right in the center, in weathered steel letters, the words "Respect Boundaries." I had it installed at sunrise, just in time for Karen to see it from her porch with binoculars, which I was almost certain she used daily. By the following day, someone had spray-painted the Greek goddess statue with a mustache. Karen blamed me, of course, though I had nothing to do with it. If anything, it seemed like her own HOA had begun to turn on her. People were tired of the drama, the lawsuits, the endless emails, and the bizarre public displays. The final straw came when she sent out a neighborhood survey asking if residents felt emotionally manipulated by livestock. Most people left the forms blank. One neighbor just wrote "Go touch grass" on hers and mailed it back. That week, an anonymous letter began circulating proposing a new HOA amendment to ban members from holding leadership roles if they had pending civil complaints or citations with law enforcement. It passed with 70% approval. Karen's reign was officially over. I thought that might be the end of her antics, but the last surprise came a few days later in the form of a peace offering. Boone barked at the front gate, and when I came to see what it was, I found a small basket with a note. For what it's worth, I never meant to hurt anyone. I just thought it would look nicer without the fence. Maybe I was wrong. Enjoy the cookies. No signature, but I didn't need one. I looked out toward the property line. The statue was gone. The speakers were silent. Karen's yard was back to neutral, and for once, I felt something that resembled peace. Boone sniffed the basket and nudged it gently. I took one of the cookies, broke it open, and smiled. Chocolate chip. Not bad. Still, I didn't eat it. I left it on the porch table, a strange little trophy of an even stranger war. Because on this ranch, we don't retaliate with fists. We build fences. We train bulls. And when someone comes crashing through the line, we let them learn the hard way that respect isn't optional. It's required. The weeks that followed were quiet in a way that made you suspicious, like when the sky goes too still before a thunderstorm. The neighborhood had returned to its slow pace, kids riding bikes, dogs barking at squirrels, HOA notices going out about lawn lengths and trash bin placement. But none of them were signed by Karen anymore. Her name had quietly disappeared from all official communication, replaced by Gary, who had somehow become the accidental hero of the whole affair. He took the role begrudgingly, mostly to keep Karen from crawling her way back in. I stayed out of the HOA's business as usual, content to mend fences both literal and metaphorical. But the truth was, I still had one last thing to do before I considered this war officially over. For the past few months, the ranch had been through chaos. Bulls on parade routes, lawsuits, viral videos, and more drama than a daytime soap opera. My livestock had been treated better by strangers on the internet than by the people who shared my property line. Karen's stunt had cost me time, stress, and money, though thanks to the judge, I wasn't the one footing the legal bill in the end. Still, I wanted to end it on my own terms, not with hostility, but with something so absurdly poetic it would become legend in the neighborhood and serve as a permanent reminder. I called the same welder who helped with the gate reinforcement and asked him for something custom, something symbolic. A week later, it was ready. On a sunny Friday morning, with Boone following close behind and a crowd of curious neighbors gathering near the edge of the pasture, I unveiled it. It was a life-sized iron statue of Beefcake, the very same bull who flipped the golf cart, standing on his hind legs, front hooves resting on a faux float banner, with a plaque that read "Guardian of the Boundary, in Fences We Trust." People burst out laughing. Even Gary doubled over. Someone livestreamed the unveiling and it made the local news under the headline "Rancher Turns HOA Feud into Art Exhibit." Karen didn't come out to see it. Her blinds were shut, and her driveway had been oddly empty for days. It turned out she was staying with her sister in the next county over, taking what some of her former allies called a personal mental wellness break. I figured that was code for licking her wounds, and honestly, that was fine with me. I had no interest in rubbing salt in them. The statue wasn't meant to be cruel. It was a way to reclaim the chaos with a bit of laughter. That was always the problem with Karen. She took herself far too seriously. A few days later, I was out by the pasture checking the motion sensors when Gary rolled up in his newly repaired golf cart. This one had an air horn and bull horns mounted on the front, purely for the comedy of it. He waved and parked, climbing out with a folder in hand. "Got something you might want to see," he said, holding the folder like it contained a secret. "Turns out someone made an anonymous complaint to the county about your new fence system. Claimed the electric setup was a danger to public safety. Let me guess, the complaint was handwritten in aggressively loopy cursive." "That's the thing," he said. "It wasn't. It was typed. Completely anonymous. But I had it looked at through some contacts. Turns out it came from a printer registered to Karen's sister's address. She's still at it, even from out of town." I sighed and rubbed my temples. She couldn't help herself. It was like trying to swat a fly that insisted on buzzing back no matter how many times you opened a window. "Well," I said, "good thing the fence is fully legal, fully permitted, and about as dangerous as a toaster unless you're dumb enough to grab it during a thunderstorm." Gary grinned. "Counties already dismissed it. They're not even responding to anonymous claims anymore unless there's photo evidence or video. Seems like someone's used up their last shred of credibility." I thanked him and offered him a cold drink. We sat on the porch for a while, Boone between us, watching the sun go down over the hills. It was the first evening in months where I felt like I wasn't waiting for the next move, the next scheme, or the next violation. And that's when it hit me. Peace isn't just the absence of noise. It's the presence of something settled, like when a wild bull finally lays down in the grass and closes its eyes. The following week, I received a letter in the mail. No return address, but I recognized the handwriting immediately. Inside was a single page with just a few words. I hope you enjoy your fences. Some people build walls because they're afraid. Others build them because they're hiding something. I read it twice, smiled, and folded it neatly into the drawer of my desk. That was her final move. A cryptic jab meant to stir something. But it didn't. Because I wasn't hiding anything. I built those fences for safety, for my animals, and yes, now for a little peace. If Karen saw them as walls, that was her problem. She was the one who had crossed the line, not me. And if she ever tried again, I'd be ready. Not with anger, not with lawsuits, but with the same calm my bulls had shown her that day. Unmoved, patient, and completely unwilling to chase after nonsense. Eventually, the community began to lean into the legend. Kids started naming their bikes after the bulls. Someone made t-shirts with a cartoon version of Beefcake in sunglasses. A local bakery created a cookie called Karen Crunch, shaped like a picket fence with bite marks. And I kept ranching, mending, feeding, planning the spring calves. Boone chased squirrels. The bulls kept to their field, happily unaware of the fame they'd acquired. One evening, a family from 2 counties over came by, said they saw the story online and wanted to take a photo with the statue. I welcomed them, gave them a tour, even let their kid feed Margarita a carrot through the fence. They laughed the whole time, called it the friendliest ranch they'd ever seen. And I realized something. All this madness, all the yelling and finger-pointing and viral videos, had accidentally made something good. It had reminded people that boundaries matter, that animals aren't villains, and that sometimes the best way to fight pettiness is with poise. As summer rolled in and the hills turned gold, I stood at the edge of my land, looking over that reinforced fence one last time. It didn't represent division to me. It represented effort, experience, the line between chaos and order, between entitlement and respect. Boone sat beside me, tail thumping in the dirt, nose twitching at the evening breeze. We didn't need to say it aloud, but we both knew. The battle was over. The ranch was quiet. And thanks to one overzealous HOA queen, a few stubborn bulls, and a whole lot of lessons, the line had been drawn, and this time, it wasn't going anywhere.